It is Wednesday, 28th of August, 2024. Welcome to the God 9 video. A lot of people have been asking about this one. It's been a minute. The reason for the gap has simply been that it's been summer. Well, so-called here in the UK, anyway, weather-wise. Wonder why that could be. Anyway, it's not the most productive of times when you have a family, when you've got children, summer holidays. There's a lot to do. I have actually been skirting around here, there, and everywhere doing events and taking care of other stuff, but things tend to get more productive for me from September onwards, so hold tight for a whole load more in the coming months. But I did want to lay this video down because I've had a few things on my mind, and I thought it would be a good idea to summarize them in this video. So, as this is the ninth in the series, and I've been doing these since January, I thought it would be a good idea to present a summary of where I'm currently at in terms of what I've learnt myself through exploring these topics, what I've learnt from much of the feedback that I've got from folks that have been watching the videos, that have emailed me or dropped comments in the chat sections, and also from some of the conversations that I've had with guests where we've got into some of these matters. I had a great chat with Howdy McCoskey a few weeks ago, Eric Dubay, of course, Tony Sayers, and I've just had a really good chat with a dude named Benedictine the Truth. Some of you may have seen that on my video channels. He's out there in South Africa, and he's come to many of the same conclusions that lots of us have with in terms of these matters as well. So, how do you summarize a subject as complex and deep as this? I guess I would say that I've come to a grudging acceptance that this realm in which we find ourselves physically incarnated is not the creation of the original creator God. So, the force behind everything that there is. This realm is the creation of a lesser God, of an entity, or I would say an abomination, which considers itself godlike, but has somehow taken on the creative abilities to construct this realm for its own means. And it does not have the upliftment and the benefit of all humanity in mind. We seem to be aspects of that original creator God force. Some refer to us as divine sparks. This would explain things like why we have consciences, most of us. Barring psychopaths and sociopaths and narcissists and people like that, a very small minority within the human population. But everyone else has a conscience, and we instinctively, inherently know the difference between right and wrong. When we do something we know we really shouldn't have done, most of us are plagued with guilt or perhaps shame. It seems that this realm has been constructed to be as difficult as possible for we humans to navigate, we divine sparks, you might say. So things have been put in place here, like simply the passage of time and the fact that we age, our bodies decay and degrade as we get older. And some people find themselves in terrible physical shape, either due to simply aging or due to lifestyle factors or due to bad luck, disease. I mean, what's that all about? Why do we have to have a realm where all that stuff is in place? This realm seems to have been constructed to cultivate fear, pain, suffering, trauma, and of course, eventually physical death. And all those states of being create vibrational frequencies, energies, which are very dense, very slow, and based in fear. So it's all derivatives of fear. And we're put through the ringer in this place in terms of how difficult our lives are made so that we generate anxiety, stress, worry, fear, regret, and all these different expressions of fear-based energy. Whatever entity created this realm, and many names have been put on it, so some just simply would describe it as Satan. It seems to be the Yahweh being of the Old Testament. This being was described as the demiurge in the Gnostic tradition, Rex Mundi by the Cathars, and there have been various other names put on this entity. In the Gnostic tradition, beyond the demiurge, this lesser god, which somehow took on the ability to create this place for itself, for its own means, it has around it this council, this committee, if you like, of beings known as archons. These seem to be expressed in various traditions around the world in different ways. In the Christian tradition, they're referred to as demons. In the Islamic tradition, the jinn, and many other names. But I think we're looking at the same entities, the same forces, whatever ancient tradition you consider. So they're describing the same beings, just in different ways and with different names. And this really would explain a lot. It would explain why everyone has some kind of suffering, fear, pain, trauma, struggles, hardships, obstacles in their lives. It's not plain sailing for anyone. You do get some people who seem to be really quite lucky. So they don't get much of that in their lives. They spend most of their life having fun, enjoying themselves, and embracing all the finer things that this life experience can offer. You know, joy, happiness, abundance, all that sort of thing, gratitude. Those really are the lucky ones, though. And when you meet people that say, oh, life is just a learning experience, and of course you have to go through a bit of hardship, because how would you learn your lessons otherwise? How would your soul grow and evolve? Well, I guess people that say that haven't spoken to survivors of satanic ritual abuse or trauma-based mind control, as I have. Survivors of things like MK Ultra and all these other horrors. I'm not going to go into the detail of what children from a very young age are subjected to within these programs. There are other shows that can go into that detail if you want it. But who honestly is going to meet one of these people, listen to their story, and say, oh, you must have chosen this on a soul level before you came in. You must have decided that you wanted these absolute horrors to occur to you so that you could grow and evolve. Who's going to say that to the parents of a child in, let's say, Gaza or Yemen or anywhere else in the world who may have had a bomb rain down on their house in the middle of the night because they're living in a war zone and it blew their limbs off? And the parents somehow have to deal with that situation and find the will to carry on living. I mean, these are extreme examples, but these things happen. And I hear from New Age inclined people that, you know, we choose these experiences and everything that happens is part of our life plan. And supposedly it's all about consciousness, God, if you like, wanting to experience itself in an endless array of different ways. So it, or we as expressions of it, construct these different life situations and these different experiences so that we can find out what it's like to be regretful, for example. Find out what it's like to be patient. Find out what it's like to be angry. Find out what it's like to be placid and calm. All these different things. Supposedly, they teach us what it's like to undergo these things, what it's like to have a violent temperament, what it's like to be on the receiving end of a violent temperament, what it's like to uh, learn to be tolerant of other people and the process that you have to go through to achieve that. So here's a question which I don't often hear asked. How many times does consciousness or God need a particular experience? So, for example, how many times does consciousness need to know what it feels like to be a woman on the receiving end of, I'm not going to use the word because the algorithms would probably take the video down, but it's a four-letter word beginning with R. How many times do women have to go through that for consciousness to go, oh, okay, yeah, now I get it. Now I know what it feels like to be a woman who gets that in an alley late at night. Think about animals, living things, living sentient beings. Let's take, for example, cows or chickens that go to slaughter in an abattoir. How many cows and chickens do we think have gone to slaughter in abattoirs all around the world in human history? I mean, the number would be immeasurable. You're not even talking trillions. You're talking way, way, way beyond trillions. I mean, it's measured in billions every year in terms of how many land animals go to slaughter for the meat industry. So, how many times does consciousness or God need to go, I wonder what it's like to be a cow that goes through all that terror and all that trauma and all that horror in an abattoir? I think I'll create that experience for myself. At what point does it go, okay, yeah, got it. Receive that lesson, on to the next one. That's a flaw in this idea that we create these realities for ourselves of our own volition, of our own free will. And it's one of so many flaws in that way of thinking. I do not accept that we came here of our own volition. It's way, way more likely, and there's so much more evidence to support the idea that we were somehow tricked or coerced on a soul level in whatever existence we found ourselves in before this one to incarnate into these bodies and to undergo these experiences. I want to play a couple of clips at this point because I think this will help to illustrate the idea of this force, this entity, which would have created this realm and why it did it. It did it because it feeds off of the negative energy, the derivatives of fear, stress, anxiety, worry, all this stuff, which all of us experience in our lives at some point. I would say most people in these times, in the 2020s, because of the way society has been engineered, are experiencing those states of mind daily. How many people don't have some form of stress, anxiety, worry in their lives at this time? So the first clip is from a show which I've mentioned before. It's a different clip though. There was a really good show which aired on ITV in the late 70s going into the 80s. It was called Sapphire and Steel. It was a really low budget science fiction show which kind of rivaled the BBC's Doctor Who, and in my view, did a much better job of it. Starred Joanna Lumley and David McCullum. An interesting fact about it is that the producer was one Sean O'Riordan, and he turns out to be the father of the very well-known club and radio DJ and pioneer of acid house culture in the UK, Judge Jules, real name Julius O'Riordan. Sean O'Riordan, his dad, was a TV and radio actor. He starred in The Larkins in the 1950s. That was a role for which he was best known. And then he went on to become a writer and a producer for television, including the creation of Sapphire and Steel. Another interesting snippet about Judge Jules is that he happens to be the nephew of the well-known TV celebrity chef Rick Stein. So Rick Stein's sister was Judge Jules's mother. Why do I mention this? Well, yes, it's an aside. I'm going off on a tangent, but this is part of the information that is going to appear in my next book, Musical Truth Soundbites, delving into the family backgrounds of more famous people and explaining how they got into their famous prominent roles. It wasn't down to hard work and good luck and doing a bit of networking and hobnobbing. It was entirely down to their family connections and often who their old man was. So it's just one example of that. Anyway, Sean O'Riordan was the producer of Sapphire and Steel, and this brief clip from the second series, which was the very best. I remember this used to terrify me to death when I watched it in 1979 as a young lad. And it concerned the ghost, the spirit of this World War I soldier, a Tommy, who haunted this derelict railway station. And the idea, the reason he does it, is because he bears a grudge. He's resentful. He's resentful of the fact that he died before his time when he wasn't meant to. So he died right after the armistice, 11/11/11, and news had not reached where he was out on the front line that the armistice had been called. And so he got killed at a time when peace was supposed to have been restored. And his spirit is resentful of the fact that he lost his life needlessly. And he's joined by the spirits, the ghosts of others who feel that they were taken before their time for various reasons. Anyway, this brief clip talks about the force which presides over this derelict railway station and which is using the resentment, the negative energy exuded by these spirits to feed itself. It's using it as sustenance. It cannot survive unless there's this resentful, grudgeful, negative energy. So here's a reference to that. And if you're watching this video on YouTube, I may have to take out these clips because of all the copyright nonsense. You should be able to view it if you've got the BitChute, Odyssey, or Rumble version of this video. But if you're watching on YouTube, keep watching for the rest of this message. Another clip I do want to play, at least in these other versions, comes from the Netflix TV show Stranger Things. And I know I've referenced this many times before, and I've used a few clips previously. And the reason for that is it's simply a great show, which tells us so much. There's so much truth buried in the narrative there. So the creators of this show are supposedly the Duffer brothers, who are relatively young guys, Matt and Ross Duffer. I suspect that there are other forces who wrote the storyline for this show and created the concept in the first place. But this part is very telling. So season 4 is, in my view, the very best. I mean, it's a great show throughout. Wasn't so keen on season 3. I'm not so keen on all the monster stuff. That's just there to draw in the mass market audiences. But the real intellectual stuff comes from, well, I would say in season 4. So spoiler alert for anyone that may still want to watch this show, but we come to discover that there is a creator of this alternative realm known as the Upside Down. So you've got the so-called real world, which takes place in the fictional town of Hawkins, Indiana. But then there's this parallel universe type existence, which is known as the Upside Down. And it's a very dark, twisted, negative version of the other reality. So everything's in place. All the buildings and all the features of the town are there, but it's shrouded in this kind of misty darkness. And it's a very negative place. And we come to discover that this has been created by this entity known as Vecna, coming out of the Dungeons and Dragons game. And in season 4, the audience gets to discover who Vecna really is and how, as an entity, he was created. So he gets banished into this kind of purgatory hell world by the character 11, played by Millie Bobby Brown. And she's the product of MK Ultra style mind control research, spent her childhood growing up in a laboratory undergoing those sort of experiments. And it's caused within her extrasensory abilities. So she can remote view and she can use telekinesis. She's got these incredible psychic powers. So in this clip that I'm going to show you, she banishes this guy Vecna into this sort of purgatory hell world. But then later on, he explains to her how he realized that he could use his creative abilities to construct a realm for himself, his own version of creation. He realized he could become his own god. Through the innate creative capacity within him, he constructed this realm known as the Upside Down. He populated it with these horrific entities, these monsters that we see. And I think we're being told here, in a coded symbolic way, the story of the creation of this realm. So this entity, whether you call it Yahweh or the Demiurge or whatever, is represented by Vecna. And this so-called 3D reality that we call Earth, that we call home, was constructed by an entity very similar to Vecna, who may have been banished in the same way that Vecna was. And this entity realized that it could create its own construct, populate it with divine sparks, with aspects of the original God consciousness, i.e., us, and then deliberately cook up a situation whereby we're constantly held in states of stress, anxiety, fear, worry, regret, depression, all the rest of it, jealousy, all these different expressions of fear-based energy. I mean, it's all starting to come together in my mind now. It's all starting to make so much sense. This is why there's never been a time in human history where there's been peace that we're aware of. There's never been a time where joy and happiness and abundance has been everywhere. And there's been no conflict, no strife, no war, none of that. Instead, all we read about when we go to the history books, and yes, I know the history books have been doctored, but we know some horrific things have happened throughout history. Genocide, torture, famine, war, just horrible states of being for humans. Why would anyone choose this on a soul level? That New Age stuff just makes no sense. It's gaslighting. It's putting the emphasis back on us for all the bad things that happen to us and saying, you chose this, you made this happen, you wanted this. No, don't accept that. We were forced into it. No one would have chosen this. And the idea that this realm was created by some Vecna-like evil being that wanted to use our fear as a food source for itself is known as louche energy, of course, in a term coined by Robert Monroe back in the 1970s. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. And it's very consistent with this excerpt from Stranger Things. So I think we're getting the truth here of how this realm was created, to what end, and this would demonstrate a lot of knowledge of these matters on the part of probably not the Duffer Brothers, but somebody else involved in the creation of Stranger Things. So again, spoiler alert if you've not seen the show, but here's the clip that I want to play you. So another excerpt I just want to put in there at this point comes from David Icke, who's someone who's been talking about alternative subjects for 35 years now. He gets into conspiratorial stuff, breaking down the way in which this so-called 3D reality is constructed, who really runs things, the groups, the networks, the systems that are used to get everything in place. And he's done a very good job of breaking all that down. But he also gets into spiritual, metaphysical matters. And for many years, he's been talking about these entities known as archons and the demiurge, which is this sort of lesser god that presides over these forces. And he talks about the generation of fear-based energy in this realm to keep these beings sustained. So it's interesting that in his dot connector video just recently, he spent some time talking about this idea. I've just got a quick snippet here to give the theme of what he discussed in that show, because it's very consistent with what I've been talking about in these God videos and what many others like Eric Dubay, Tony Sayers have been talking about as well. So let's take a listen to this.
They're basically saying to you, in terms of the Islamic God and the Christian God, I'm going to create you. I'm going to put you in a shithole where you're going to have enormous, enormous challenges, often none of your own creation. And then whether you are there for a few seconds or more than 100 years, I'm going to judge you on your behavior for all frickin' eternity. It's ridiculous. And so you add that to the cognitive dissonance of a loving God in the world that we live in, and surely we can ask the question, has a loving God actually created this reality?
Yep.
Or is it more likely to have been one of great psychopathic malevolence who has created a world in which people suffer physically, mentally, emotionally to survive another day? That's what most of the human race is doing, trying to survive another day. And that, as I've said in the books, this force which actually created this reality, this simulation, this simulated reality, is feeding off the low vibrational, emotional, mental energy that is produced when people have these emotional, mental, physical traumas. Is that not more likely that you have created basically a world specifically designed for the population you have perceptually entrapped to produce this low vibrational energy which you are feeding off?
So a point that I would like to make here, an observation, is about inversion. So when you learn about how secret society networks operate, when you learn about what Satanism is and how Satanists and dark occultists go about their business, you come to realize that everything we're ever told by any kind of establishment source is a lie. We live in a world of deception. And the very, very best advice when you're told anything by the mainstream media, a government minister, or some kind of government public relations department, any kind of big corporation, any kind of so-called educational establishment, any sort of authority source, the Royal Society, any of these organizations, is to take whatever they tell you and spin it in the exact 180-degree direction. Got a couple of props here. The first one is this book from Fergus Greenwood. Many of you might be familiar with it. It's a bit of a doorstop, and it's called 180 Degrees. And in it, it's meticulously researched, by the way, Amazing job from Fergus. He spent many, many years putting that book together. Definitely comes highly recommended. The general theme of it, hence the title, is take anything you're told and which is presented as truth and flip it 180 degrees. And then you stand your best chance of finding the actual truth. Because the powers that should not be, the establishment, the controllers, the dark occultists, do that. They take truth, flip it 180 degrees, and then present it to us. So we'll be told that we get to choose our governments, for example. It's a democracy, don't you know? Thank God we live in a democracy in Britain, eh? Imagine if we lived in a dictatorship where our leaders were served up to us and we had no choice in the matter. What a nightmare, eh? Of course, the truth is there is no democracy. You have no choice. Your leaders, so-called puppets, are chosen for you. So that's a lie. What about existence itself? How we came into being? Well, the general scientific consensus among the establishment community is that there was this event known as the Big Bang, where everything in existence spontaneously came out of nothing. This makes no logical sense. You can't create something out of nothing with absolutely zero there in the first place, and yet we're presented this as truth. Then you have the lie of dinosaurs, that dinosaurs ever existed. I mean, this is all part of the same system. The Big Bang, the idea of dinosaurs, and the idea that we live on a spinning ball hurtling through the infinite vacuum of space in 4 different directions at once, with 666 encoded endlessly into the measurements and the calculations. And yet we don't feel a thing. Wait, did you feel that? Did you feel that movement, that spin? Me neither. That's because there ain't any. The Earth is exactly the way it appears to us through our senses. We're given our senses for a reason, so that they can work for us, so that they can intuit logic and reason and come to sensible conclusions. The Earth feels completely still because it is. It's not moving. And yet we're duped, deceived, gaslit into thinking we're living on this spinning space pear, wobbling and tilting and spinning around all over the place, hurtling us around in all these different directions, and yet we just don't feel a thing because there's all these forces and vacuums in place that sort of go with the atmosphere of the Earth and suck us along with it so that we don't realize that we're moving, apparently. It's one big lie. Maybe the biggest lie of all, apart from the one concerning what we are and where we really come from. But it's all part of the same system. So dinosaurs, the Big Bang, evolution, the idea that humans somehow evolved from monkeys and originally from some sort of pond slime. Even though there are still monkeys around, so I'm not quite sure why some monkeys evolved into humans and others just stayed as they were. Well, I am, because it's all bullshit. So all these different systems of belief that are served up to us are designed to make us feel small and helpless, like we're nothing, we're just insignificant specks in this huge, ever expanding, cold, soulless, heartless universe. And we might as well just get on with our lives and go to McDonald's and go shopping at Primark and watch Coronation Street, because that's really all there is to life. And it's quite short, and one day you're going to die. So just, do what you need to do and don't think too much about these big questions. That's the way it's served up to us. But the 180-degree inversion of what we're told about the place in which we live is that it's flat and motionless and stationary, not a spinning ball. So in that example, you take what you're told and you flip it 180 degrees. And that applies to all things. You know, we're told that governments run the world. We're told that Joe Biden has been the most powerful man in the world for the past 4 years. Seriously? I mean, they're just getting so blatant with it now. They're taking the piss in clown world so much. They must be laughing their asses off at their secret society lodges and their little rituals that they do. There must be rivers of piss flowing out of Bohemian Grove as these occultists laugh at how much they're duping and deceiving most people in the general public. And they're falling for this. I mean, Joe Biden, seriously? And people have accepted that he's been a responsible leader, so called, for the United States. Truth is, he's not a leader at all. He's doing the bidding of those who really pull his strings. Anyone paying attention, anyone applying critical thought can see that. But it's just 180-degree inversion wherever you look. So let's apply that principle, which is a pretty good one. It's pretty watertight, to the question of this existence. We're told in most religious systems and in most spiritual ways of thinking as well that there is a loving, benevolent creator God who created this realm and placed us here. In some spiritual systems and some religious ideals, we chose these incarnations, we chose to come here. And it's all to grow and evolve and have these experiences that we then take back to source with us when we pass over. And it's all by consent, we're not forced here. And the reason God created this place is because he loves us and he wants the best for us. And the reason there are things like torture, genocide, parasites, natural disasters, the reason all these horrific things happen, you know, wars, terrorist attacks, is just so that we can grow and learn lessons from them, you know. The reason there are parasites and ticks and small beings, bacteria, germs that embed themselves in children and cause disease and cause intense suffering and pain for them is all part of their learning experience, don't you know? They wanted it. They chose that because it's all part of their life lesson. That's what we're entrained to believe. If we apply the 180-degree inversion principle to these ideas, I think we start to get somewhere near the truth. This realm is not the construct of any loving, benevolent, caring creator God that wants the best for us. It's the opposite. It's the creation of an evil entity which is malevolent in intent, and this place was specially constructed to cause the most amount of fear-based suffering and trauma in everyone, because everyone at some point in their life undergoes trauma. It starts when you're born. In most countries around the world, birth trauma, the very act of being born, the very act of leaving the comfort and the warmth of your mother's womb and coming out into the bright lights and the sounds and the harshness of this world is traumatic enough. And that's before things like ultrasound is applied to babies in the womb, which traumatizes them. It sounds like thunderstorms going on to them. And then the doctor smacking a baby's ass the second it's born to cause it to cry. We're told that, oh, it's clearing the fluid off the lungs and it's an important process. No, it's become a standard in hospitals because smacking the baby's ass causes it pain and shock and alarm and causes it to cry. There's its first trauma in its life. There'll be plenty more along the way. So this place is here to generate all of that. because the force that created it, call it what you will, feeds off that loosh energy. For me, that's a very real concept. All the evidence backs it up. So that's the bad news, and yeah, it's not the best, is it? But there are positives to be taken from this, I feel. And I always attempt to put a positive slant on things. Otherwise, what's the fucking point? To be honest, if you're going to say that this place was created by some sort of Satan, some sort of fucking demon, and we're stuck here, we're trapped here, there's nothing we can do. And even when we die, even when we pass over, there's a very strong chance that we'll face even more deception. When you get into the idea of the reincarnation soul trap, which is a very popular idea now, it's one that I discussed with Eric Dubay and Howdy and Tony Sayers and Benedictine. Many people are discussing this now. There's a very strong consensus that these demons have devised methods of trickery when we pass over to coerce us or guilt trip us into reincarnating. So it's like this endless loop. We just keep going round and around. We keep getting spat out into the matrix, into this virtual reality CGI construct, whatever it is, seems to be computer coded, seems to have coding built into it to ensure that you don't need a watchman, you don't need some demon presiding over this place 24/7, making sure there's enough fear and trauma and pain and suffering, because this place has been coded, like computer coded, like a video game, to make sure this stuff just automatically occurs. Because we are all so stressed and anxious all the time for so many reasons. So you have that process occurring. And there's this strong idea that when you face this soul trap, these entities will masquerade as maybe loved ones that have passed over, or maybe some religious figure that you had some attachment to in your life. So if you've spent your life as a Christian, believing in Jesus, when you pass over, these entities may well manifest themselves as a vision of Jesus. Or if you're a Muslim, they may manifest as the Prophet Muhammad. And this figure will try and coerce you, persuade you to come back to Earth because you've got a mission to complete. That's what we hear. Or they'll show you visions of the way you lived your life. So, according to many experiences of near death, NDEs, near death experiences, people that have temporarily left their bodies, clinically died, gone over to the other side, but then come back into their bodies to tell the tale, always recount the same things. They say that the minute they leave their body, all the pain goes, any sort of discomfort they might have been feeling just goes. They feel very light. They feel like they're in a very blissful place. And they feel very happy to be detached from their body and away from this place. Then they recount experiencing a tunnel of bright light. And they say that so often the light is like nothing they've ever experienced on Earth. The intensity of it, the brightness is just overwhelming. Then they say, so many of them, that they get met by visions of loved ones or religious figures, or even, if they were a fan of Elvis Presley or, Muhammad Ali, somebody like that. So they get met by a vision of a personal hero. And this figure might try and guilt trip them, gaslight them into going back. So they'll say something like, oh, you didn't have the best of relationships with your son or your mother. You need to patch things up. There's unresolved conflict there. So you're going to have to go back in a new life and encounter this family member of yours in a different situation, and you're going to have to work out this problem, these differences between you. So off you go. And many of these experiences say they just didn't want to come back because they felt so wonderful in this place. The last thing they wanted to do is to come back to Earth, but they were sent anyway, or they were very strongly persuaded to anyway. So if this is true, and we've got no way of knowing unless we've had a near-death experience ourselves, I've not. If this is a very real thing, which we're going to face when we pass over, we need to put some preparations in place while we're still here, while we've got the opportunity to process all this stuff with our minds, with our intelligence, and to do whatever we can to pave the way for a transition out of this place. Because the last thing I ever want to have to do is to incarnate back here in any way, shape, or form at any point in time. I want out, and I know many other people feel the same way. So if we're going to face this life review where we're shown everything we've ever done instantaneously, and we're made to feel, excuse me, the way others who were on the receiving end of our actions came to feel, the best way we can avoid being tricked by that into reincarnating is to undergo an exercise which I heard Howdy McCoskey and Eric Dubay talking about in the great conversation they had recently. So Eric was talking about doing the life review yourself while you're still in this life. So it's being as honest and candid with yourself as you've ever been in terms of what you've done. So, as well as acknowledging all the stuff that you're quite proud of, you need to rake through the shit, dredge up all the dark aspects of things that you may have done in your life. So, I'm going to start doing that. I've bought myself a notebook, and in the evenings, I'm going to slowly start writing down everything that I can remember about everything I've done in my life. It's probably going to take more than one notebook, okay? But you've got to start somewhere. And I'm going to have to be very honest. I'm going to have to consider how my actions, my choices, may have impacted others. And it's going to be uncomfortable in parts because there's going to be actions which I've undertaken in my life, which I'm not too proud of now, and which I would do differently now. And I'm going to have to acknowledge how that may have made other people feel. So that's what the exercise is doing the life review yourself, coming to terms with what you've done, reaching a place of acceptance and acknowledgement, doing the dark night of the soul, and maybe, just maybe, that will avoid you having to do that on a soul level when you exit your body and encounter whatever lies beyond. If you really want out of this realm, you need to have a cast iron, steely resolve that this is your last time round. You're not coming back. You're going to transition beyond into whatever kind of existence you choose to have when you leave these bodies. Or maybe you choose to have no existence at all. We are sovereign. We are creator beings. That's why we're so valuable to these parasitic forces. So we do have the ability to create whatever existence we want for ourselves, just like Vecna in that Stranger Things clip. I mean, he chose to create this dark, horrific realm. Most of us watching this video, I suspect, would not choose that. We would choose a much more benevolent, worthwhile, positive existence. And we can create that for ourselves. So we've got to stand firm in our resolve to never be tricked or coerced to come back here again. And if we undergo beings, visions coming out of that tunnel of light, saying you need to undergo a life review, oh dear, look at this aspect of your life. That wasn't too great, was it? Look at how that impacted other people. You can say, actually, already done it, already sorted out that shit, already confronted it, already accepted it, ready to move on. You ain't getting me that way. I'm not going back. I'm not going back. I'm not going back ever under any circumstances whatsoever. Not going back, not going back, not going back. That is the level of resolve that we're going to have if we're going to transcend this soul trap, if it's real. And while we're in these lives, we still have the opportunity to prepare for that and to consider uh, the possible reality of it. So that's a pretty good exercise, I feel. The other exercise, which I think Eric mentioned in that video, was letting go of attachment to this realm, to this existence, to these lives. And that can come in all kinds of forms. There are people who are addicted to things. They might be addicted to drugs, to alcohol, to sex, to chocolate, who knows. They might be obsessive collectors of memorabilia, sporting stuff. In my case, records. I mean, I've been a DJ. I've got a shit ton of records. And always through my life, I've thought those records are staying with me for the rest of my days because they mean too much to me. They're full of memories. They're records that I've played on the radio, played in clubs. Every record tells a story. And I've thought I do not want to get rid of my records. But I've started getting rid of my records because I've recognized that they represent attachment to this life. They represent my consciousness identifying as Mark, the DJ, the guy that played records. That's just my temporary existence. I'm not Mark, a guy who plays records. I'm infinite consciousness. And I don't want to be stuck in this mentality that this is who I am. I'm defined by these records and these possessions. So I've started selling my records and I'm gradually going to whittle it down. Not necessarily going to get rid of every single record I own. I may keep a few special ones, but the vast bulk of them, because I've got thousands, are going to have to go. So I'm doing record fairs, sticking them on Discogs, eBay. They've got to go. Same thing with my books. Got some books behind me. Not necessarily going to get rid of all my books, but again, I've got a lot of books and many of them can go. And it's all kinds of possessions. I want to get to a point where I've got a bare minimum, where basically I've got a bag, an overnight bag, and it's got everything I need to exist in it. You don't need much. You really don't need much in life. You don't need much by way of possessions. Most of it is just clutter, it's junk, it's crap, it's just shit you've accumulated over the years, and you're never going to use it again. You're never going to miss it. It can all go. And I think that's a pretty good way of letting go of attachment to these lives so that whenever your end comes, you've got the least amount of clutter bogging you down and weighing you down and keeping you attached to this place. It's a difficult one with loved ones, you know, family members, because of course you're going to feel attached to them if you've got a good relationship with them and you're not going to want to leave them. But you have to come to terms with the fact that you are going to have to break those ties as well, because you don't want attachment to family members to be the thing that keeps you weighted down here and possibly sent back if the soul trap is real, soul trick, as Tony Sayers calls it. You don't want these entities appearing and saying, oh, your daughter misses you too much. Your son misses you too much. You've got to go back. They can't cope without you. So, you know, back into your body you go, or back into a new body in a new relationship with this family member you go. You want to avoid that if you're anything like me, because this place is not our home. We're sitting here doing time, in the words of John Lennon in his record, Watching the Wheels. Sitting here doing time, just sitting it out, making the best of it that we can, and waiting to deal with whatever challenges face us when we get out here. But I feel the good news is that we can at least come to terms with this information now. And that in itself is empowering. So, in previous ages, pre internet, pre the opportunities we have to freely share information in these ways, there was virtually zero chance of individuals coming to these acceptances, these realizations. So they would have gone through an entire human lifetime in spiritual ignorance. Good news comes from the fact that now we can know better if we choose to. We can research these things, which so many of us now are, and we can prepare ourselves. And if we've been tricked, coerced, forced into these lives, and I believe we have, we stand a chance of finally being able to break that chain and resolving to never be forced to come back here again. The reason these lives are so difficult is because we're not supposed to be here. This is not a natural home for us. We belong somewhere else. That's God 9. I welcome feedback, as always, from anyone by way of email to markdevlin2022@protonmail.com, or you can leave comments in the chat sections of whatever video platform you're watching this on. On to other matters, a few housekeeping points and just some stuff to round up. There is one point I just want to address while I'm on. I've been getting a few messages complaining about the fact that I now operate a Patreon channel, which I have for the past few months. The general theme is, why are you charging for your material? I've been watching your stuff for free for years and really enjoyed your content, but I can't afford $8 a month to subscribe to your Patreon. And now I'm missing out on the content there. I've had this from a few people that have told me they're pensioners and they're struggling financially and they just can't afford it. And of course, I sympathize. I don't like to hear of anyone struggling financially. This is all part of what I've been talking about in this video, the struggles that we all go through. But let's really break down what's going on here, this scenario. So I've been putting out content online in the form of videos, podcasts, interviews, other information, social media postings for free for the best part of 15 years. I've been giving of myself, of my own time, energy, resources for the best part of 15 years. It's only now, at this point, that I've created a Patreon channel and I've just created a Substack as well for my written articles. So this is where people can choose, because it's always a choice, to subscribe to my Substack and get access to written articles which are going to appear in my next book. So you get an advance view of these. What these people are saying is, Mark, you've been putting out information for free for 15 years, so you need to continue to do it endlessly. There can never be a point where you can ask for donations in exchange for your work. You've just got to continue to put it out for free forever. Those kinds of complaints only ever come from people who have never been content creators. So they have no idea just what goes into creating a video like this, for example, or doing a podcast or taking part in an interview. It takes a lot out of you. Not only are you tapping into all the knowledge that you've accumulated over the years and recalling all that information and putting it across in an eloquent, easily digestible way, it also zaps you spiritually. It takes something out of you on a spiritual level because it's draining. It's draining doing this work when you talk about these subjects. People think it's fun and, it's great to go around doing all these talks and stuff. And yes, I find a lot of fulfillment in the work that I do. And I consider myself very grateful to be able to do this. But it is all that I do. This is a full-time job for me now. I don't have anything else. I have a family, I have bills to pay, and I have to keep a roof over mine and my family's head. I also have operating costs to cover. If I'm going to be traveling around doing talks and conferences, if I'm going to be producing podcasts and researching information and putting out books, stumping up the cost up front to get books printed and get t-shirts printed and things like this, that has to come from somewhere in this reality. I'm just the same as anyone else in that I need fiat currency until we come up with a better system of, conducting ourselves financially. I need means to be able to operate. So is it really so bad, so sinful for me to have started a Patreon channel where, again, let's examine what's going on here. I'm putting information on that Patreon, which is exclusive to that channel. And I'm saying to subscribers who are able to support me with their donations, this is information that you guys can have in exchange for your kind support. Everyone else, if they choose not to support me on the Patreon, or if they just can't afford it, still gets the free information. Not the Patreon stuff, but everything else. So this video, for example, how long have I been speaking now? This video is being put out for free, open source to everyone on YouTube, BitChute, Odyssey, Rumble, and anywhere else. All my interviews that I do, with very few exceptions, the interviews that I do where I jump on other people's shows and podcasts, I put out for free. People are really going to complain that at this stage in the game, with all the work that I've done, with all that I've given of myself, all the energy, all the aspects of my very being that I've poured into the information that I put out there in a very passionate way, people are going to complain when I ask for a few donations to help support myself and continue my work. In what other field would you encounter this? Imagine a plumber, because I love talking about plumbers. So your sink is blocked. A plumber, that's his trade, that's his job, comes to your house, he unblocks your sink. He goes, "There you go, love. No charge." And he walks off. A month later, your toilet gets blocked. You call the same plumber. He comes out, he unblocks the toilet. He says, "There you go, love. No charge." And he goes off. A couple of months later, you've got a leaky pipe in the garden. You call the plumber, he comes out, he fixes the pipe, he goes, "There you go, love, no charge." When would that ever happen? In what other walk of life? So people just completely accept that a plumber fixes your sink, you pay the guy. You pay the guy what he wants. So why is it so different with information, with content creation? People think that because we're seeking truth and we're trying to uncover lies and stuff like that, it should all be done for free. Well, how are you supposed to support yourself then if you do this as a full-time job, as I do, as many, many other people do as well? I mean, what do they want us to do? Do they want us to be living in a cardboard box in a shop doorway with no money, no food? Would they be happy then? Be like, yeah, that's okay. Yeah, we don't mind now. Yeah, well, guess what? No more content creation because you're not going to have a computer or the internet or electricity. So, doesn't really make a lot of sense, does it? The choice is simple. Patreon is there for anyone who chooses to support me further. So anyone who has found value in my work and would like to see it continue and would like to help a brother out, to put it bluntly, can do so via the Patreon. Now I've got the Substack, and if people want an advanced look at many of the articles that will be going into the next book, Musical Truth Soundbites, it's more exposure of the shenanigans of the music industry, then you can subscribe to Substack and you can get advanced view of that copy. The links to the Substack and the Patreon are in the show notes below. There are other ways you can support me if you choose to. You can make a donation via Buy Me a Coffee. You can make a straight donation via Patreon, or you can get involved in some of the products which I'm affiliated with. So these are all ways of just helping me out. I mean, I know to some people it's going to come across as a commercial, but again, it's not until you've been a content creator that you get a full appreciation of just what's involved in this. So at this point, I just want to mention this. Let me just lose these props. And the next one is this box, which I received from Clive De Carle, who I met at the Hope Freedom Music Festival in Sussex this Friday just gone. So Clive's given me this starter pack of many of his products. Many of you will be familiar with Clive De Carle. He's a guy that gets into natural health and organic ways of looking after your health. So we've got all kinds of stuff here: fulvic minerals, Lugol's iodine, we have magnesium, we've got a zinc blend, vitamin B, vitamin K2, sodium bicarbonate. Clive swears by this stuff. So Clive is someone who's done many live talks and many podcasts, and he's spoken about how he's healed his own health personally through natural compounds and supplements and vitamins and such. He knows a lot about it. He's discussed it on many podcasts and interviews and such. I will be doing a new interview with Clive De Carle very soon, and we'll be talking about how to look after your health in these times, these unprecedented times where we're faced with all this stress and all this trauma. How can we take care of ourselves physically to remain in optimum shape? So we'll be talking about that. So he's pretty much an authority in the UK on all this stuff. And I've become an affiliate of his brand, whereby if anyone wants to get hold of any of Clive's products as detailed on his website, if they use the exclusive link, which is detailed in the show notes below, then a small cut of that comes to me and it helps to support me in my work again. So the link for that is in the notes below, along with everything else. I mean, this is stuff that you have to do, because if you just continually put out your content for free, people will continually lap it up for free. And they'll think, oh, great, another video from Mark where he's poured his heart and his soul and his very being into everything that he's expressed. I'll just freely consume that. And in many cases, not do anything with it, just soak it all up and just absorb it into my mind, but not do anything with it, just use it for my own personal knowledge. You just can't keep doing that forever. Not in this reality. Not faced with the challenges that we all are. Life is not getting any cheaper, you may have noticed. So I'm going to leave that there. There's some ways that people can support me if they choose. Either way, the work will continue for as long as I'm able to do it. I'm going to be working on the audiobook version of Musical Truth Volume 2 in the coming weeks. I want to get that out by the end of 2024, so this side of Christmas. Doing these audiobooks is a huge undertaking. That's why it takes several months. That's why I've not done an audiobook of Musical Truth 2 yet, because I've just had so many other things on. All my other books are currently in audio form, narrated by myself. All I've got to do is catch up with Musical Truth Volume 2, and then that's the entire set. So watch out for that on Audible. And of course, you can get download copies of it from me by the end of this year. And then beyond that, as I've said, the next big project is the next book, Musical Truth Soundbites. I want to fast track that. Initially, I thought I would get it out by the end of 2025, but I really want to get that out by next spring. So I'm going to have to work really hard on that. That's a winter project for me to help me make it through these long, cold winter nights. I'm just going to be beavering away at getting that book written. So I want that out by, would be great to get it out by sort of April, May next year. So that's the plan. Other than that, I think that's quite enough for this video. Links to everything else are in the notes below as ever. God 10 will be coming next. Don't quite know what it's going to consist of. It will rather depend on what comes across my path between now and then. And I've got many more interesting conversations lined up, or in mind at least, for the coming weeks as we continue to explore these topics. And to be honest, I think everything is layered. So when you come to truth discovery, and when you realize that this is a world of deception and lies, usually the first thing that you come across is the real world conspiracy stuff. So you start to piece together the methods that have been used by the controllers to get a stranglehold on humanity. So you start to discover how secret society networks work and how organizations like the Bilderberg Group and the Council on Foreign Relations and the Club of Rome and the World Economic Forum, how they operate and how they control governments and all this kind of thing. And then usually you go a step beyond that and you start to get into spiritual realms and you start to question the true nature of this reality. And I think most truth seekers that have been through that conspiracy phase get led into this new age way of thinking. So they allow themselves to be persuaded that we chose these existences on a soul level and it's all for our own growth and evolution. This to me is another distraction and another deception designed to keep you away from real truth. So if you're prepared to go a layer beyond that, and if you've got the courage and the fortitude to go there, then you end up at the point that I and many others are now, which is being courageous enough to question the true nature of what we think of as God, and to ask if this force, the force that created this realm at least, is truly benevolent and truly good. And I think if you're honest with yourself and if you truly look at the evidence and assimilate it, you're going to come to the conclusion, even using the trivium process of truth discernment, that this realm is constructed to cultivate fear, pain, trauma, suffering, and that the entity that created it thrives on that stuff and feeds off it. It's not to say that there's not a creative, generative force out there, the real, true God, what we would call God. I mean, if I didn't believe that there was, there would be little point in me carrying on. I do accept that there's something better out there. It just doesn't lie in this realm or in these lives or in these bodies. It's somewhere else. So that may be the message that I continue with God 10. Who knows? It will come when it comes, but there'll be plenty of other output in the meantime. Thanks for watching.